Hello and welcome to SecureWorld Behind the Scenes, our exclusive interview series. This is Tom Bechtold, your co-host for today's program. Thank you all for joining us. Today, Bruce Sussman from the SecureWorld media team will be talking with Rob Palermo. Rob joined SecureLink in 2017 and currently serves as the Vice President of Product Management and Strategy. He oversees product management, product marketing, general market strategy, and professional services. Prior to joining SecureLink, Rob served as Consulting Director for Vista Equity Partners Consulting Group, where he partnered with his customers to drive operational excellence. Today, we're discussing why most organizations are failing at third-party remote access. Welcome, gentlemen. It's great to have you both here. Bruce, take it away.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tom, so much for that introduction. And Rob, I echo Tom's sentiment. It's excellent to have you here as we discuss, why a lot of organizations are failing at securing their third-party remote access. Rob, thanks for joining us for this conversation.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you, Bruce.
Yeah, and I kind of wanted to dive into this conversation. We like to go behind the scenes, go a little deeper on a topic. And one of the things that you had mentioned to me in this area, something that kind of illuminates the situation, was some research conducted by Hobson Company. And I think a lot of our audience may not have heard about this. Can you kind of unpack what that research found?
Yeah, absolutely. We recently completed a couple of different research efforts. One was with over 1,100 IT and security professionals around third-party access, the risks out there, best practices. We also did an exercise to understand some of the, hard costs and hard dollars associated with some of the programs out there. Really interesting stuff. I think, in a nutshell, unfortunately what it, shined a light on was that as a security group, we're sort of failing at third-party remote access. So over 60% of breaches today are attributed to third-party access, even though organizations on average are spending about $1.5 million a year on man hours as well as technology to solve the problem. I think we can get a little bit more into that. I think the good news, what we found is that IT and security leaders do recognize that this is a problem. So in our survey research, over 2/3 of respondents stated that third-party remote access was high risk or very high risk to them, and they actually prioritized investing in new technology to secure third-party access as the number one investment they're likely to make over the next 3 years.
Well, that's fantastic that is coming up as far as an urgent topic that people are able to address or willing to kind of put their money where their mouth is on that type of topic. You mentioned that it can be expensive. What would you say are the most common costs, but also the risks associated with most third-party remote access strategies? What are you seeing around that question?
Yeah, I'll start with the risk. I think the most common risk and what we found in the research is that, frankly, most organizations don't have a bespoke strategy. So again, in that survey, only 30% of those IT and security leaders that we spoke with actually have a standardized strategy, approach, and methodology for allowing third parties into critical systems and applications. The other 70% are using a hodgepodge of different solutions. So whatever their vendors might be using or whatever different business stakeholders are dictating. And this makes it really, really difficult to manage and very, very unwieldy and very costly. In terms of the hard costs, the number one cost is just time. So the time that it takes IT and security teams to set up and manage vendor remote access, to troubleshoot issues, to audit their activity, or provide reports to auditors in some industries. And that's through our research. For an average organization of 25 vendors, that takes about 4,500 hours every year to do that. In terms of harder costs, the other issue is then downtime of critical systems that are managed by vendors. So as organizations spend more and more time trying to put security controls, sometimes the result is they actually have more critical downtime events from vendor-managed machines or infrastructure applications. This could be medical devices or gaming machines at a casino or machines on a manufacturing floor. So again, the average organization is having 1 to 3 critical downtime events. So leaders are finding themselves in a catch-22, if you will, where the more time and the more effort they put around controlling vendor access, they're actually causing business disruption. And so they're sort of trading off one cost for another, unfortunately.
Yeah, I could see how that would be. I mean, there's maybe 2 bad choices or 2 big challenges at the same time, and it's kind of a trade-off. I do want to ask you as kind of a follow-up to that question, because I know your organization, I mean, you specialize, right, in third-party remote access and securing that. What are you seeing with the shift to work from home, and now it's kind of like work from home and maybe the office, but it's just really fractured as far as that goes? What kind of challenges have popped up for organizations? Are you finding things that your clients are dealing with?
Yeah, no, we absolutely are. I don't know if the challenges have changed, but they've certainly been more pronounced as more work is reliant on remote access with folks working from home and working remotely. But the challenge sort of remains the same, which is to find a solution that is secure, but also fits the needs of all of your users, right? So if you look out at the landscape of remote access solutions, they're usually pretty good or purpose-built for one specific use case. So they might be designed to provide end-user support, and so they're built around desktop sharing and they're built around collaboration, but they can't do a lot of the more technical sort of direct access that will be required. Or you may find other solutions that are very secure, but they're only really good for standard protocols like RDP or SSH, but they don't fit the needs of vendors that maybe use non-standard or customized protocols. So the challenge is finding, hey, what's that single solution, or at least a manageable handful of solutions that are going to be secure, but also handle the needs of these vendors. And so again, with the shift to remote work, it's just more and more solutions popping up that business users are needing to use to access systems remotely or work remotely that, again, are all new threat vectors and new things that security teams and IT teams need to consider.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you for that follow-up answer there, and that's a great overview of the challenges. And speaking of challenges, my next question is, what are the most common vulnerabilities in current methods used with third-party remote access? What are you seeing?
The biggest challenge is just balancing what's secure and what's going to work. I would point out that regardless of the tool, probably the biggest vulnerability isn't really a technical one that we see. When it comes to third parties, it's really how do you manage all of the identities and all of these users. So unlike employees, you don't know when a business partner or a vendor has new users that may need access, or you don't know when somebody is hired or fired. And so managing all these vendors, making sure that the users that need access have it, making sure that users that no longer need access don't have it, is really, really difficult to track and manage. And unfortunately, the approach by most companies or many companies is they just outsource that to their vendors. And that creates a lot of risk because you're relying on your vendor you're sending them a shared credential that all their users use, which becomes a vulnerability and a threat vector. Or you're relying on your vendor to tell you on a weekly basis, hey, here are all the users that need access and here's what they need access to. But if they make a mistake, you're going to end up at risk.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Okay, excellent. Appreciate that. Next question, and this is a pretty broad question, but I think it speaks to strategy, right? And perhaps some tools as well. What is the best approach to managing third-party remote access? If you had to give us an overview and maybe fill in a few details on that, what would you say to our audience?
Sure. It sounds simple, but the biggest mistake, or probably the biggest recommendation, is just starting with the needs of third-party users and third-party organizations. So taking the third-party lens when you're crafting your strategy. Each business is unique. They're all going to have different requirements, but what we see over and over again is organizations, although 60% of breaches come from third parties, they don't start with, hey, what do I need to do to manage this unique use case? They start with, what solutions do I have out there and how do I extend them? So they look at their privileged access management solution and they say, oh, can we extend this to cover third parties? Or how do our employees, how do we run access management for our employees? How do they get remote access into these systems? Oh, can we just extend that to third parties? And that's a mistake because third parties are unique. And so we always recommend, hey, start with the needs and the requirements and build a solution around that. But over and over again, we see organizations that have some things in place, have some policies that have been built around employees, and they try to extend those. And unfortunately, this usually doesn't work. The second recommendation is just to know who your vendors are. Again, these are very simple things, but when we talk to new customers that are coming on board with SecureLink, only about 10% of them can actually tell us, hey, here are all the vendors that require secure remote access into critical systems. So it begs the question, if you're an IT or security professional, how can you be sure that you have secured that if you can't even identify these vendors? So making sure that you have stock of these vendors. Organizations are getting better at this, but making sure you've taken stock of who they are, how they're accessing, and then putting in a solution around their unique needs. And then again, related to my earlier point about managing vendor users and not letting your vendor manage their own users for you, we really recommend taking that identification and authentication of vendor users in-house. Don't outsource that to your vendors. It's too important. It's too critical. It needs to be under your control.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's a crucial element to maintain control of this part of your security posture. Rob, I do have a follow-up question because midway through the last answer, you mentioned the idea that employees and vendors have to be treated differently. Do you think and do you find that a lot of organizations are trying to treat their access as almost one and the same, or what's happening in that space?
Yeah, that is what we see. They're either, again, saying, hey, we'll just take these tools and processes and we'll apply them to vendors that they're using for their employees. But again, you don't know all of your vendor users. They're very transient. They may come in and out of the organization. They may need access only for an hour or a week while they're on a project. And you don't control their hardware, and you don't control how they necessarily need to support some of the solutions or devices that they're supporting. So yes, unfortunately, we do see that. Or if they can't figure out a solution that they have that works for their employees, they sort of throw up their hands and they say, vendor, whatever you use to typically support your customers or gain access, just use that. Just use whatever comes out of the box or whatever you use to support your customers. And of course, the trouble with that is you've now lost control. Those solutions will vary greatly in terms of effectiveness and security. And then having visibility into all your vendor activity becomes impossible. So if you need to figure out why a system went down, or worse, there was a data breach, actually doing the forensics and pulling together all that information into one place becomes, darn near impossible because you're needing to work with every vendor that may have access to your network or different devices. They may not have the logs of what they did. And so, both of those scenarios end up being less than ideal.
Yeah, I can certainly see how those scenarios would be less than ideal. One other follow-up, because you hit on a really interesting point, I think, when it comes to third-party and vendor management. You said that some organizations that you're onboarding only know maybe 10% of their actual vendors that they have and are working with. What do you suggest to organizations who are struggling to identify their vendors? Because obviously, if they're coming to you with 10%, that's a challenge, right?
Just to clarify, it's about 10% of organizations actually know all of their vendors. So
okay, I got it. I misheard you, but still the idea is there, I think, that it is a challenge, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a challenge. It comes down to, frankly, making it a priority from a security perspective that, security teams need to be aware of and have some level of control over how all of these vendors are accessing. I think historically, sort of efficiency has been job one. So let's make sure these vendors can do their jobs. Let's make sure they can access things efficiently. Let's make sure they can work with, the business stakeholder at your organization. But, where has that gotten us? Third-party breaches are increasing every year. Again, the majority of breaches are caused by third parties. So it really comes from the top that there needs to be a standard. IT and security needs to play a role or be at the forefront of setting that strategy and setting the standards, and if possible, setting a single platform, a single solution that all vendors are accessing on, so these organizations do have the visibility and the control that they need to ensure that they're safe.
Yeah, that's great. Appreciate that perspective. Last thing, for organizations who are not familiar with SecureLink, give us a few bullet points. Obviously, we know you're in this space we've been talking about today. You're an expert in that, but give us a few bullet points on what you do and how you operate.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, our mission is simple, which is to wipe out the third-party threat. And so what we provide is a purpose-built single solution that's solely focused on managing vendor access to all of the systems that you deem privileged or you deem sensitive in any way, shape, or form. So at the heart of what we do is a remote access platform and software, but we also provide, because this is all we do, we also bundle in all of our services to help our customers identify their vendors, onboard their vendors, train their vendors, and set up all of the workflows they need so that they can sort of have that best of both worlds where they are secure and they have control, but they're also seeing enormous efficiencies in how their vendors are able to gain access and how business and work gets done with them in their third-party ecosystem.
That's fantastic. Well, that sounds like efficiency and security working together, which that's something as I travel the country and interview various CISOs around the U.S. and also in Canada. They're very interested in things that, allow for business enablement. So it sounds like you're right on that track. So Rob Palermo, Vice President of Product Management and Strategy at SecureLink. Thanks so much for being with us today.
It was great to be here. Thanks, Bruce.
Yeah, really appreciate it. And so, Tom, I will turn it back over to you.
Yes, thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Rob, for sharing your thoughts on third-party remote access. Definitely a very important topic that folks should be thinking about. Thank you to SecureLink for making this series possible. And be on the lookout for future behind-the-scenes interviews with the SecureWorld digital team, as well as the remote session series. This does conclude today's broadcast.